Oklahoma City Thunder finally are able to handle the San Antonio Spurs and handle them in a big way. That was a huge win for Oklahoma City on Wednesday night, and really, I guess Tuesday night. But for 2.5 quarters, the Thunder, I mean, they were living at an uncomfortable pace. One that they're really not used to anymore, right? Because they're the defending champions, right? They're the best team in the Western Conference. They're at home. And yet the Spurs still have kind of pushing them to where the Thunder can't take control of this game. And that's what makes the third quarter of Oklahoma City's 119-98 win, blowout, by the way, really important. Not because it was flashy, not because it broke highlight reels, but because it was corrective. We finally saw corrective movement against the team that's been a thorn in their flesh. This was the moment when the Thunder stopped, negotiating with the Spurs and just reminded San Antonio who they are. Because make no mistake, this wasn't another January game. This was unfinished business. The Spurs had already beaten Oklahoma City 3 times. One of those losses snapped the Thunder's 16-game winning streak way back in December. Another one came, with a level of physicality that just lingered. San Antonio didn't just beat Oklahoma City. They got under the Thunder's skin. And you could feel it from the opening tip on Tuesday night. This game had an edge. 48 fouls in total, 3 technicals, constant chirping back and forth, bodies on the floor, hard contests at the rim, no rhythm, no comfort. And like I said, for 2.5 quarters, it felt like San Antonio believed they still had Oklahoma City figured out. And that belief mattered because up until the third quarter, nothing had disproven that. But then comes halftime, where the game's still up for grabs. No separation, no decisive run, just 2 teams circling each other, probing for weaknesses. And the Spurs had every reason to believe that they could do it again for a 4th time. But then, third quarter, champions, they punched back. The Thunder opened the second half with an 11-0 run. And, the key wasn't the points, it was the pressure. Defensive pressure, passing lanes vanished for San Antonio. Dribble penetration became claustrophobic. The Spurs suddenly had, they had to work for everything. They responded like a confident team does. They come back with a quick 7-0 run of their own. But then came the moment that I think could have swung the night either way. You got Wemby colliding knee to knee with SGA, but it's Wembyama who goes to the bench. And those are the moments that tilt games. Those are like momentum moments. They're emotional moments. And Oklahoma City made sure that it only tilted in one direction because what followed that was a defining stretch of the game. You got a 14-1 Thunder run that didn't just push the lead, but it kind of ended the game before the fourth quarter ever even arrived. By the time that run was over, Oklahoma City had turned what was a close game into a 95-76 advantage. And San Antonio never threatened again. But here's the important part. This wasn't about shooting variance. It wasn't about luck. It wasn't about a hot hand. It really wasn't even about Wemby going to the bench. It was about force. The Thunder outscored the Spurs 40-24 in the third quarter by doing what championship teams do when they sense resistance. They tighten the screws. They don't panic. They don't overreact. They don't try to win the game in 5 possessions. They just suffocate you. Over the final 2 quarters, San Antonio scores just 40 points total. Now that's not a coincidence. That's an adjustment. And at the center of all that, once again, you got the MVP, SGA, finishing with 34 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 blocks. So that stat line's pristine. But the timing was everything. 15 of those points came in the third quarter, and every one of them felt heavier than the last. Right? Driving through traffic, mid-range pull-ups over late contests. Defensive plays that ignite transition. This wasn't SGA as an entertainer. It was SGA as an enforcer. And quietly, almost casually, he extended one of the most remarkable streaks in NBA history, 111 consecutive games with at least 20 points. Now, that number doesn't scream the way a triple-double does. It doesn't flood social media, but it tells you everything about Shai's reliability and his understanding of when a game needs him most. The Thunder didn't need 45 points from him. They just needed control. They needed ownership of the moment. And that's exactly what he delivered. But the real reason, I guess the real story of this game, I think it goes beyond just one player. Because the most important takeaway from Tuesday night, I don't think it was individual brilliance. It was collective clarity. Oklahoma City held San Antonio to 40% shooting for the game against a roster that features, we talked about Wemby, you got Castle, and it's a system that's built on pace and creativity. That is a staggering number. And they didn't do it with gimmicks. They did it with discipline. Help defense arrived early. Closeouts were sharp. Physicality wasn't avoided. It was embraced. And the Thunder didn't fear Wemby's presence. They respected it, and then they managed it. 17 points, 7 rebounds. That's a solid night for most players. But for Wembanyama, it felt contained. Then not an accident, preparation, and resolve. Jalen Williams chips in 20 points without forcing the issue. Another quiet reminder of how far he's come as a secondary threat, who understands timing and flow. He didn't hunt shots. He just punished mistakes. And maybe the most telling of all, when the third quarter avalanche hit, the Thunder didn't let up. They didn't shift into cruise control. They didn't start playing not to lose. They just kept defending. They kept attacking. They treated the final 24 minutes of this game like a referendum. That's what championship muscle memory looks like. And that's why this game matters beyond the standings. Oklahoma City already leads the West. This wasn't about positioning. It wasn't even really about revenge, though, that undertone is pretty unmistakable. But this was about reestablishing terms. For all the talk about rivalries being born in the playoffs, some of them start in January when one teams decide it's just tired of being tested by the same opponent again and again and again. The Spurs walked into the Paycom Center believing that they had Oklahoma City figured out. They walked out knowing that the equation had changed. The Thunder are no longer the team improving that it belongs in this league. They're no longer the fun story. They're no longer like a rising threat. They are the champions. And reminding everyone else, where the line is drawn, that's what they do. And on Tuesday night, that line was drawn in the third quarter. And once Oklahoma City crossed it, San Antonio just didn't have the horses to follow through.